Hello, it's Friday and it's here in Nova Scotia at this time. It's 3 o'clock. So I'm quite later than I'm usually aiming for. But it was just the nature of my day. But here we are, and we're going to do our devotional for today. We're in the book of Proverbs, chapter 3, and we're on verse 11 today. So we're focusing on one verse at a time. I'm going to read verse 11 and 12 together because of the way this part of the book is structured. The ideas are composed over two verses. We're still going to focus on one, but we're going to read both just to get the full thought. So we're going to read verse 11 and 12, and then we'll focus on verse 11. So it says, "My son, do not reject the discipline of the Lord, or loathe his reproof. For whom the Lord loves, he reproves, even as a father corrects the son in whom he delights." So in our next session, we'll focus on that second part, which is really quite a nice thought, but we'll do that in our next one. For today, we're going to focus on that first part, so I want to read that again. So, "My son, do not reject the discipline of the Lord, or loathe his reproof." And then it goes on to tell us why we shouldn't, why it's so good to not do that. So what's this talking about here? So the idea behind this verse is of course, we're all the son in this. He's speaking to all of us. And so what he's telling us is this idea of, he states it in a negative. Let me state it in the positive. He states this idea of not rejecting the discipline of the Lord, but let me state it in the positive. What he's saying is this, accept the fact that God disciplines you. Accept the discipline he gives. Love his reproof. Now, he says it in the negative because our tendency is to act that way. So he's speaking about the action. We don't tend to think about accepting. We tend to think about the action of rejecting or not rejecting. But in a sense, it's useful for us to think of it in the positive too. It's like, no, the actual act of accepting it. The idea of accepting the discipline of the Lord in our lives. God, if you're in a relationship with God, there is going to be discipline. He's going to do things in your life that will be in the category of discipline or in the category of reproof. The New American Standard translation that I use uses the word reproof there, which is not a common word in our language these days, but basically means to tell you you're wrong, to tell you you've done wrong. Don't do that. And to not hate it when God says, don't do that. Instead, to accept that and to love the fact that he's given me direction in this respect. And so that's the idea there. It's interesting how often we do reject God's discipline. No, God, don't tell me what to do. Or we reject God telling us that there's something we're not supposed to do, that we're wrong in something. Oh, no, I'm not going to accept that. I reject it. I hate it when people tell me I'm wrong. That's the idea. And so that's what this verse is saying. Don't do that. And there's a very, very good reason, but we'll deal with that next time. So let's go through our 4 questions. Question 1 today: how can we love being reproved? Now that's hard to do. If you're anything like me, you don't really like to be wrong. You like to be right, and you don't like people telling you you're wrong. But you can get to this place in your life where you realize the value of it so much that you actually do want people to tell you if you're wrong. Now, you don't want to be told you're wrong, aggressively or rudely or often even, but you do see the value of being corrected, because going off in the wrong direction is very costly. So what you do in your mind to help get yourself to the place with anybody, and even another human, but especially with God, what you do is you get yourself to a point of saying, I'm not going to hate this. There'll be a natural tendency to hate being corrected. You read something in the Bible, for instance, and you're like, oh, God says that's a sin. And I don't think, why is that a sin? And we'll have this sense of like, he's telling me I'm wrong. This is something I thought whatever. And what you need to do in your mind when those moments happen is say, oh, look, I'm stepping into hating it or rejecting it. And what I need to instead step into is actively recognizing the value of what I just read. Knowing that God corrects us from a place of love, and God corrects us for our good. It's not arbitrary. God's direction and fatherly leadership in our life is not arbitrary. It's not selfish. It's not pointless. It's good, very, very good. And so you remind yourself of this. And you go, I may hate what I'm hearing because it goes against what I thought, but it's for my good, and it's from a God who loves me. So it's not actually hostile to me. So I shouldn't be hostile to him when he does it. And so that's how you can learn to love being reproved. The other side of this is one of the reasons we reject the discipline of the Lord is because we've elevated ourselves to his level, right? You think about the idea of two relationships, and relationships are usually built kind of like this. But then there's some relationships that are not built, right? A father to a son, or a teacher to a student, or something. And most of the time we're striving for equal. We want to be on the same footing, right? And when it comes to God, sometimes we act that way. And it's like, you shouldn't tell me. Who are you to tell me? And we need to change our thinking to go, wait now, I'm the learner. He's the father. I'm the son. So naturally, he should teach me. And I shouldn't think that I can just reject him. He knows more than I do. So that's the idea. Question 2. What option do we have? How could we possibly reject God's discipline? If you think it through, you can kind of go, well, I haven't got the power to stop God from disciplining me. If he wants to, he's going to do it. I can't do anything about it. So why is this verse telling me not to reject it? What choice have I got? Well, it's not actually talking about rejecting the act so much as it's rejecting the acceptance of it into you, right? So God can just like what any parent of a human parent can with their own children. You can discipline your kids, and your discipline can fail to have its impact if the child simply resists you to a certain point where they reject you as having any authority in their life. And so the impact of the discipline can be quite resisted. That's the same way with God. We can resist letting God's discipline do its work in us, and we can act and decide to treat God as if he's simply hurting us, or he's simply being mean to us, instead of realizing he's instructing us and leading us. And that's the idea here. If I reject God's discipline, I will tend to fall into the position of saying God's just being mean. He's just a policeman. He's just like this guy, just this rules guy, and reject the impact, right? And so to accept it is to say God is good, God is a father, he is the right, and so I accept the correction into me. Now I got to figure out how to accept it, how to embrace this and change my life, because he's right, I'm not. He's right. So it's about accepting the rightness of it and allowing it to impact your inner person inside you, go through the mind, of course, but then get into the inner side so that it actually impacts your life and you actually try to figure it out. So I've used this example in church here before, but if God were to correct me and somehow, he were to say, I hate blue, don't ever wear blue. Now, I may not get it. I might be a little offended. I like blue, and I might not like it, but if that really was a thing God said in the scriptures, which he didn't, but if he did, then I can accept that correction and say, okay, I will learn to also push blue out of my life. Or I can reject it and say, God's, he's unreasonable, and no, I like blue, and I'm not going to, and well, that's rejecting God's discipline, right? Or hating it. So that's the idea. Question 3, what does the discipline of the Lord look like? Well, so how would I know that God's disciplining me? Sometimes discipline of the Lord comes about through experiences, things we experience, negative outcomes. The curse of God can fall on people for different reasons. That's the thing that can happen. And sometimes that is the case. Sometimes we may endure various hardships or difficulties because of our stubbornness in listening to God. Now, the Bible is full of examples of this, in particular the stories of Israel as it would reject God regularly, and he would bring them. He would allow an oppressive army to take over or something, and there'd be a consequence for their stubbornness. So that's a thing. So that sometimes happens in our lives, but it doesn't always. And just because we suffer doesn't always mean we're being disciplined for something. Sometimes that's not the case at all. Sometimes it's for the glory of God that we suffer, or some other reason, or whatever. But so that's one way. But more commonly, what I would argue is that most of the discipline of the Lord actually occurs in our emotions. It occurs inside. It goes through our mind, and it comes up against the wall of our inner will and our inner emotions, and it hits that wall, and it's like God kind of breaks us down inside, and so and sometimes in my own personal walk with God, I've found there's times God is revealed to me something that was wrong in my life, and it's brought me to weeping because I realize I'm so sorry, God, and it breaks me down, and it's painful and hard, and yet it does a great work, So sometimes it's that, or it's other things, but that's just one example. But often that's what happens, is it's through the challenge of His scriptures, His word in your life, that you find reproof in the inside, the spiritual reproof, where God says, you've been walking wrong, and now I'm going to allow you to emotionally feel the impact of that. And it's a spiritual form of discipline. It's like getting spanked, or or being put in timeout, or whatever it is you had from your past. And it's kind of like that. It's God saying, hey, pay attention to this. You're off, and I want to bring you back to what's right. It can feel offensive, or it can feel like something I shouldn't have to endure, and we can decide to reject that and try to push that out. And in our world, I mean, that's a thing that people do all the time, isn't it? We tell God certain things are out of bounds. God, you're not allowed to have this part of my life. It's too hurtful, or it's not, whatever. And we try to say no to God and things that we feel most passionate about. And those are the very things God is actually trying to get into and say, hey, even your passions have to be directed rightly. So let's do that. So that brings me to question 4, which is, I think, an important part of today's study. And question 4 is, how can I feel safe if this kind of thing can happen in my relationship with God? Right? So I bring that up because there is a lie in the world right now that is really dangerous to your life. The lie is that there's something wrong if you ever feel difficulty, right? That if you feel offended, or if you feel like someone told you you're wrong, or if you feel that someone puts an obligation or an expectation on you, and if you feel the tension and the difficulty of that they've done something wrong, that's the lie. That's what the lie is that somehow we have this right to go through life safe from ever being told that we need to change, that we need to adapt, or anything. And it's a lie, because it's actually very much the opposite. If we never learn that we're wrong, we will go through life very unsafe. If you just think about it from the perspective of growing up. If you think that you should never be told you're wrong, then your 2-year-old self should be the same today as you were when you were 2, because there was nothing wrong, right? So you could still be wearing your pull-ups, and you could still be sucking on a soother, and whatever else, because you weren't wrong, right? There was nothing to grow out of, right? Right? You see, that doesn't work. You have to come to a place in your life. That's what maturity is. Coming to a place in your life where you can say, hey, I need to sometimes feel bad. I need to sometimes recognize that I was wrong in what I thought and need to change. And I need to sometimes realize and accept obligations being put on me in my life. Not every obligation, but the right ones. And when the right obligation is put on me, I need to accept that, even if it's uncomfortable. I need to accept that, because that's what it is to become fully functioning, healthy adult human being. And so God does this in our lives. God looks into your life, and He'll point out things, and He'll say, you were wrong there. That's not right. You need to change your thinking on that. And you may feel bad, and the lie is, that means He's doing something wrong. No, He's not. You need to listen to God. Or He may say, you're obligated. Here's my law. Here's what you're supposed to do. You're obligated to do this. And rather than rejecting it, who are you to put obligations on me? Well, He's God. So accept it. Don't hate it. That's the idea. So to close off today, how about you? Do you accept God's discipline, or do you hate God's discipline when He confronts you with something? Good question to ask yourself. Next time on Tuesday, we'll come back to our devotional. We'll do verse 12 and talk about how much this shows that God really likes you and actually loves you deeply. And so it's actually safe, very, very safe to have God do this in our life. It's very good for us. God bless you. Help you to accomplish this in your life. Amen.